in the mountains of Appalachia, where the ridges cast shadows so thick they swallow the sun, lies the story of a family whose name still brings shudders to those who dare whisper at the Caldwells. Unlike other clans whose legends are marked only by savagery and hunger, the Caldwell tale is soaked in tragedy as much as horror, for theirs was a line that didn't begin monstrous, became monstrous, piece by piece, twisted by isolation, desperation, and a fate that seemed cursed from the very start. The first known Caldwell patriarch, Jonah Caldwell, arrived in the early 1800s. He was a veteran of war, carrying scars across his body and his mind. He settled in a remote hollow, dragging his young wife and 2 sons with him, seeking peace away from men. But peace never came. Locals whispered that Jonah was already half mad when he built the first Caldwell cabin along the riverbanks of a place later called Devil's Branch. His wife Margaret gave birth to 6 more children, and it was there, in that hidden hollow, that the line began to curdle. The Caldwells were not well liked, even in their early days. Jonah was violent, known to beat his children and lock them in the cellar for days. His neighbors described him as paranoid, always muttering about voices in the trees and the river's hunger. By the 1830s, Margaret had died under mysterious circumstances. Some said she drowned in Devil's Branch, while others swore Jonah sacrificed her to whatever demons haunted him. Her body was never found. Left with 8 children, Jonah raised them in cruelty and superstition. He forbade them from mixing with outsiders, insisting their blood must remain pure. When the daughters reached maturity, he forced them into relationships with their own brothers, a practice that became a dark tradition of the Caldwell name. Their isolation, combined with Jonah's obsession with purity, began a cycle of inbreeding that warped the family tree into something grotesque. But unlike other families, who slipped quietly into depravity, the Caldwells left a trail of blood. By the 1840s, stories spread of travelers disappearing near Devil's Branch. Farmers reported finding livestock gutted and hung from trees, their bones gnawed clean. A preacher who ventured into the hollow to save the heathens was later discovered in pieces, his Bible nailed to a tree, his heart missing. Locals began avoiding the area, warning their children never to follow the river upstream. What made the Caldwell legend different was the claim that Jonah believed himself chosen by something in the hollow. Survivors rare, as they were, of hearing Jonah and his children chanting by the river, offering blood sacrifices to the hungry water. One account described a scene where Jonah slit a man's throat and let the blood run into Devil's Branch, the family cheering as the current carried it downstream. Some claimed the river would boil, bubbling red with hunger, as if drinking its fill. When Jonah died in the 1850s, the family only grew stranger. His eldest son, Caleb, took his place as patriarch, but Caleb's cruelty was different. Where Jonah was violent and paranoid, Caleb was ritualistic. He forced his siblings and offspring to wear the bones of their victims as jewelry, decorating the cabin with skulls and carved totems. He taught the younger Caldwells to sharpen their teeth with files, believing it brought them closer to beasts and, therefore, closer to the power of the hollow dot. By the time the Civil War broke out, the Caldwells were already a name of terror. Soldiers passing through Appalachia spoke of feral men who attacked patrols in the night, dragging the wounded away. One Union soldier's diary told of hearing screams echo from the woods, followed by laughter and the sound of bones breaking. His unit later discovered a clearing filled with half-buried corpses, the skulls arranged in spirals. What made the Caldwells especially frightening was their unpredictability. They didn't just kill for food. They killed for ceremony, for obsession, for what they believed were sacred rites. Each act of violence was framed as an offering to the hollow, to the river, or to their own diseased sense of family. By the 1870s, generations of inbreeding had left its mark. Caldwell children were born with twisted spines, cleft palates, or additional fingers. Some were blind, others deaf. But Caleb saw these deformities not as curses, but as gifts. He believed the river had blessed them, shaping them into beings closer to whatever ancient spirit he worshipped. Those children were hidden from outsiders, but within the family. They were revered, set on thrones of bone, worshipped as holy. The tragedy of the Caldwells is that they were once human. They began as a family fleeing the world's cruelty, but in their seclusion, they became crueler than the world ever was. Each generation sank deeper into madness, their rituals growing stranger, their bloodline more corrupted, and yet, despite the horrors, their land remained untouched. No sheriff, no posse, no government force dared to march into Devil's Branch. Those who tried never came back, and their bones, some say, still lie in the river, carried downstream to remind locals why they avoid that cursed place. Even now, if you stand near Devil's Branch when the fog is thick, locals swear you can hear them. The sound of bones knocking together like wind chimes, the faint ripple of water boiling in the moonlight, and if you listen close enough, you'll hear it, the voice of Jonah Caldwell, whispering from beneath the water, promising the river will never go hungry again. By the late 19th century, the Caldwell name had become a dark whisper across Appalachia. Families living near Devil's Branch taught their children to cross themselves when they heard laughter in the woods, and travelers were warned to keep to the main roads, no matter how tempting the shortcut through the hollow seemed. Still, many ignored the warnings, and the Caldwells grew fat on their mistakes. Caleb Caldwell had cemented his rule by the 1880s. Under his command, the family's rituals became even more elaborate, and their isolation more extreme. They refused to trade or mingle with neighboring communities, surviving off hunting, raiding, and cannibalism. Caleb declared that the outside world was rotting, and that only the Caldwells, blessed by their hungry river, would endure. His followers, brothers, sisters, children, and grandchildren believed him without question. Locals began finding disturbing signs of their rituals: effigies of stick and bone hanging from trees, animal carcasses gutted and arranged in circles, and strange symbols carved into rocks along the riverbanks. These markings were always accompanied by the smell of rot and the feeling of being watched. Some said the Caldwells had scouts hidden in the trees, children with sharpened teeth who whistled like birds to signal when outsiders approached. By the 1890s, disappearances in the region had risen sharply. Whole families traveling westward vanished along trails near Devil's Branch. When search parties entered the hollow, they often returned empty-handed, muttering about strange noises, about fires flickering in the distance, and about finding only scraps of clothing or gnawed bones. In one infamous case, a wagon train of 5 families vanished without a trace. Months later, hunters found fragments of wagon wheels and a scattering of skulls in the riverbed, the flesh picked clean. What set the Caldwells apart was their obsession with turning horror into ritual. Survivors described being bound and forced to watch as the family performed their ceremonies: mock weddings between cousins, feasts where the eldest chose brides from among their own kin, and offerings of blood poured directly into the river. One survivor, a preacher's son named William Kersey, claimed he watched Caleb Caldwell slice open a captive's stomach, scooping out the organs and throwing them into the current. The family cheered as the river churned, as though it had swallowed the sacrifice whole. Attempts to confront the Caldwells often ended in disaster. In 1901, a group of locals, tired of the constant disappearances, marched into Devil's Branch, armed with rifles. They never returned. Weeks later, pieces of their bodies washed downstream, their faces peeled away, their hearts missing. After that, no one dared form another posse. It was said the Caldwells had spies in every town, listening for whispers of an attack, ready to vanish into the woods before danger arrived. The family's physical appearance grew stranger as the generations continued to marry only among themselves. Children were born with twisted limbs, cleft lips, and sometimes no eyes at all. Some were said to crawl like animals, their voices garbled but their laughter unmistakable. Yet Caleb and his descendants considered these deformities divine. Those most disfigured were treated as prophets, given the choicest pieces of flesh during feasts, seated at the head of bone-carved tables, while the others bowed their heads in reverence. By the 1920s, Devil's Branch had become synonymous with death. Logging companies that tried to expand into the area abandoned their efforts after workers began vanishing in the night. One foreman described hearing a chorus of voices singing from the trees as lanterns flickered out, one by one. The next morning, 3 of his men were gone, their boots and hats left behind. Trails of blood leading into the woods. The Great Depression only made the Caldwell legend worse. With more drifters and desperate families moving through the region, the Caldwells had an endless supply of victims. Rail riders reported being stalked along the tracks, their campsites ransacked, their companions gone by morning. Some described hearing children laughing just outside the firelight, only to see pale, deformed figures crouched in the brush, waiting. It was during this era that the Caldwell rituals took on an even more grotesque form. Survivors told of river weddings, where young Caldwell girls, often no more than 12, were married off to their cousins beneath the moonlight, their vows sealed with the blood of captives. Witnesses claimed the ceremonies ended with the bodies of the sacrificed thrown into Devil's Branch, the water frothing as though alive. The outside world tried once more to interfere in the 1930s, when state authorities were sent to investigate the growing number of missing persons. A team of deputies ventured into Devil's Branch, only to return days later, white as ghosts, refusing to speak of what they'd seen. Their silence spoke volumes. No further expeditions were attempted. The government quietly marked the land as unsuitable for development and moved on. The Caldwell story had become a nightmare passed through generations. Parents warned their children, "Don't go near the river. Don't follow the laughter. Don't say the Caldwell name after dark." For by then, it wasn't just fear of flesh and blood cannibals, it was fear of something deeper. Locals began to believe that the Caldwells had bound themselves to Devil's Branch, that their rituals had tethered their souls to the hungry water, making them something less than human and more than beast. And yet, despite everything, people still vanished. Campsites were still found abandoned. Fresh spirals still appeared on trees, which meant one horrifying truth: the Caldwell Line hadn't died out. It had spread. By the mid-20th century, the legend of the Caldwell Line had hardened into local folklore. To outsiders, it was dismissed as nothing more than ghost stories told by mountain folk to scare children or keep strangers away. But for those who lived near Devil's Branch, the fear was real. The sound of laughter in the woods, the sight of spirals carved into tree bark, and the sudden vanishing of neighbors were reminders that the Caldwells weren't just a story, they were a presence. The 1950s brought whispers of renewed activity. Hunters reported finding deer carcasses gutted in ritualistic patterns, their organs strung across branches like grotesque decorations. One hunter claimed he followed a trail of blood to a hollowed-out log, only to discover human teeth scattered inside, as though they had been collected. Others swore they saw pale, emaciated figures watching from the tree-line, eyes gleaming like animals, movements jerky, unnatural. In 1957, 2 boys exploring the creek for crayfish never returned. Their bicycles were found leaned neatly against a tree, their fishing poles abandoned at the bank. For decades, their disappearance was a cold case, but locals never doubted the truth. The Caldwell Line had taken them by the 1970s. Devil's Branch had become a magnet for thrill-seekers. Urban legends about inbred cannibals hiding in the hills drew college students and amateur ghost hunters. Most returned with nothing more than shaky stories of strange noises and eerie shadows, but a few never returned at all. In 1978, 3 students from Ohio vanished while camping near the hollow. Their tents were discovered shredded, their gear scattered, but there were no bodies. Only a spiral burned into the ground where their fire had been. Police searched, but The woods seemed to resist them. Dogs refused to track scents, radios cut out without explanation, and search parties often circled back to the same clearing over and over, as if the land itself was bending around them. Officers described hearing laughter echoing through the trees at night, high-pitched, childlike, but with a cruel edge. After 2 weeks of searching, the case was quietly closed. The strangest part of the Caldwell legend in this era wasn't just the disappearances, it was the sightings. Hikers and locals reported seeing figures that didn't look quite human. Children with elongated arms, crawling on all fours. Women with faces twisted, their mouths stretched into impossible grins. Men with eyes clouded white, carrying crude weapons made of bone. These stories blurred the line between reality and nightmare, making people wonder if the Caldwells were evolving or devolving into something beyond human recognition. In the 1990s, a journalist named Angela Morris decided to investigate the Caldwell legend for a regional magazine. She spent weeks interviewing locals, gathering every account she could. Her final article painted a chilling picture, a family so consumed by inbreeding, ritual, and cannibalism that they had become almost mythological. But what made Angela's story infamous were the photos she included. One image showed a crude spiral carved into a tree, fresh blood dripping down its grooves. Another displayed a set of skeletal remains arranged in a circle near the creek, each skull cracked open. The most disturbing, however, was the blurry photograph of what appeared to be a figure crouching in the woods, its body gaunt, its skin pale, its mouth wide open in a grin filled with jagged teeth. Angela never revealed where she took that photo. Months after the article was published, she disappeared during a return trip to Devil's Branch. Her car was found abandoned on the roadside, her notes scattered inside, but she was never seen again. The modern era brought technology into the hunt for the Caldwells, but even that didn't break their mystery. In 2005, a group of urban explorers posted grainy footage online, claiming they had entered the Caldwell territory. The video showed them finding abandoned shacks filled with bones, old clothing, and jars of preserved organs. In the final minutes, the camera caught faint figures moving in the distance, darting between trees. The last thing recorded was a high-pitched laugh before the screen went black. The group never posted again. To this day, people continue to vanish near Devil's Branch. Hikers, campers, even experienced survivalists have disappeared without a trace. Locals insist the Caldwells are still there, hiding deeper in the hollow, waiting for anyone foolish enough to trespass. Some say they've moved underground, tunneling beneath the hills like burrowing creatures, emerging only at night to hunt. Others believe they've grown even stranger. Their deformities no longer just human mutations but signs of something unnatural. Something tied to the river itself. The truth is buried in bones and silence. Authorities deny the existence of the Caldwell Line, dismissing the stories as folklore. But the evidence, the disappearances, the sightings, the pattern suggests otherwise. In the dead of night, when the woods go silent and the river runs thick, you can almost hear them, the whispers, the laughter, the sound of teeth gnashing in the dark. And if you ever find yourself near Devil's Branch, remember this: don't follow the sound of laughter. Don't look too closely at the spirals carved into the trees. And whatever you do, don't say their name aloud. Because the Caldwell Line might still be listening. And once they hear you, they never let you go. Asterisk, the Caldwell Line wasn't just a family, they were a curse etched into the soil of Appalachia. From Caleb's reign of terror to the modern vanishings, their story proves that some monsters don't need to lurk in the shadows of folklore. They walk, they breathe, and they hunger. And if the stories are true, the Caldwells never disappeared. They simply went deeper into the hollow, waiting for the next name, the next face, the next sacrifice. But the Caldwells are just one chapter in Appalachia's book of horrors. Other families, other bloodlines, still hide their secrets in the mountains, each tale more disturbing, each secret more twisted. So if you want to keep uncovering these forgotten nightmares, hit subscribe, ring that bell, and drop a comment below. Would you dare to step foot near Devil's Branch? Or would you keep as far away as possible? And remember, sometimes the woods don't just echo with wind or water. Sometimes they laugh back.